better in our country than just about any country in the world. So we are grateful today for their good work. We say thank you to them for the food, fiber, and fuel that keeps our nation strong. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I note the absence of.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate has approved a 3-week extension to fund the federal government. The vote 87-13. This short-term spending bill will now go to the president for his signature. President Obama spoke a short time ago at the White House Rose Garden about the nuclear plant crisis in Japan. You can see that after the House is out at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN. Right now, live on C-SPAN 3, the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Craig Fugate, is testifying before the Senate Homeland Security Committee about his agency's 2012 budget and disaster readiness. Again, you can see that live on C-SPAN 3. Also, the House a short time ago approved a measure to defund National Public Radio. The vote was 228 to 192. All 228 votes in favor came from Republicans. 7 Republicans joined 185 Democrats in voting against defunding NPR. Also, a vote on a War Powers resolution offered by Congressman Kucinich failed. It called for U.S. troops to be removed from Afghanistan. You can watch the House on C-SPAN.
And I'd like to speak for about 10 minutes. I know that Senator Bingaman is on the floor, and maybe other members are coming to the floor to talk on other subjects where, I guess, technically still talking about our reauthorization of the SBIR and STTR program. Senator Snowe and I have been working through the week to manage this bill through the floor, and I want to again just say how pleased I am with the progress that we made this week. I know we haven't had we've had about 3 or 4 votes on amendments, and there are others that are pending, but we really have made progress, and I really appreciate the cooperation of all of the members. This is a very important program. We've struggled, as I've said, for 6 years to get this program reauthorized, and while everybody's running around fussing about programs that don't work, Mr. President, it's important for us to focus on those programs that do work, particularly those programs that work to create private sector jobs. It's important for us to stay focused on eliminating, reducing, and hopefully eliminating our federal debt and reducing annual deficits. That's going to be done when we do a couple of things all at one time. It's not going to be done by standing on the sidelines, slashing and burning discretionary domestic spending only, particularly some of the best programs in America. It's going to be done by thoughtful cuts and eliminations of some programs that don't work, some thoughtful eliminations and cuts to the defense budget. It's going to be done by raising revenues where appropriate to close some of the gaps and taking back some of the excessive grants to the high-end taxpayers, particularly those making over $1 million a year, in the view of this senator. And it's going to take some investments that can actually save taxpayer money in the long run, and cutting some mandatory programs. And we know, and I think that's getting very clear to the American people as this debate over the House CR and the debate over deficits and debts goes on, people are understanding that, I think, better and better. And so one of the reasons that I'm personally happy to be on the floor this week is because I know the bill that I'm supporting and offering here to the Senate, hopefully getting to the House and then eventually to the President's desk, will create private sector jobs and close this deficit gap and begin to chip away in a substantial way at the debt. We've got to grow our economy, and I have a chart that I want to call up in just a minute. But before I do, I wanted to say again a specific example of a program that I'm talking about, so people will be very clear. Projects like this were won by iRobot. This is an example, just one example of the hundreds and thousands of small businesses that received either a contract or an award through this very important program. And DOD has the largest, over $1 billion, Mr. President, a portion of their research and development budget. Prior to this program, almost 100% of that money went to big business or to universities and big business. Small businesses were just summarily overlooked. Regardless of whether they had good technology or not, they really weren't let in the front door. This program that we're talking about reauthorizing for 8 years creates that door and opens it for the small businesses in Louisiana, in Colorado, in New Mexico, in New York, and that's why we're going to fight hard for this program and to get it reauthorized to the President's desk. Let me just give you one example. The DOD needed more reliable, cost-effective robotic devices for going into caves, checking and defusing IEDs. I don't think I have to explain to anyone listening or any member of this Senate the challenges of our soldiers in Afghanistan. I've been to Afghanistan. I have not been in caves in Afghanistan, but I have visited our troops there. I've heard their stories. I have seen pictures and read enough books to know the frightening thousands of miles of caves and crevices that our soldiers are having to go into to hunt down Osama bin Laden, who still has not been found and captured, and to project our forces overseas. We have been, in some ways as a nation, kind of caught off guard, Mr. President, about the terrorist attacks and military strategies using explosive devices. And I guess we knew that this could be a tactic, but honestly, we did not have what we needed to protect our troops to win the battles. And so this program steps up and says, okay, this is what we need. Let's go out and see who's got the best technology. Instead of spending billions and billions and millions of dollars giving a contract to a big company and getting them to go through all the rigmarole to develop it, it's kind of an off-the-shelf technology almost, except that we develop the idea, give a small business the opportunity. Unlike large businesses, these small firms approach the project unencumbered by past research and approaches. They start with a clean slate. They often innovate approaches that would be challenged by conventional large businesses. They also attract young researchers fresh out of universities like iRobot that started with 2 MIT students and their professors. Ideas that started just off the MIT campus have turned a company with a market cap of now $400 million, strong military and private sector sales. You've probably heard of the private sector spin-off of the military robot, the Rhomba, a product that vacuums while one is at work and now has sold over 5 million units in the U.S. Now, this is a different product than the the robot that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but it's an example of one of these programs. When our forces needed to go into caves and find IEDs, there was some technology that developed in order to do that. The Navy has many examples. The Army has many examples. And I am encouraged to see these outstanding opportunities. This was in Bedford, Massachusetts. Now, this is the iRobot that I mentioned, and I'm going to get the chart for the IED explosive in just a moment. But this is an example of some of the projects that have been funded, and not just good for our soldiers, but obviously this company then became a company that went on to sell other products into the conventional market and creating jobs along the way. So I am really, I know that the Senator Bingaman wants to speak on energy, and I'm going to yield the floor and then come back later and put a few more things into the record before this week ends, so that when we come back in a couple of weeks, we'll have built the strongest record possible for a vote as soon as possible on a program that works, that's cost-effective, that really creates some new technologies that help our soldiers at home and help us vacuum, our floors. I mean, our soldiers overseas, and helps us vacuum our floors here at home and create American jobs in the process and help us to close this deficit and debt gap. So I thank you, Mr. President, and yield the floor.
Listen.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts on the budget process that is underway, where we are with the continuing resolution that we voted on this afternoon. First, with respect to that measure, I think that was a tough vote for me. It was a tough vote because this is no way to run the government. We're here now dealing with business that should have been done last year. Unfortunately, the Senate last year didn't get its work done, didn't even do a budget, didn't do the normal appropriations process, started kicking the spending can down the road last year, and we're still in the midst of that. I'm not sure how many continuing resolutions we've had at this point. 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm losing track. But this last one for this next 3 weeks, frankly, it's the last one that I'm going to support. This I could support because it does sustain the lower level of spending that was passed by the House. And, there's some tough cuts in that bill, but it's very necessary that we get serious about getting our spending under control. This is a small step in that direction. But I really want to urge my colleagues to let's bring an end to these 2-week, 3 weeks, short-term, kicking the can down the road. Let's resolve this. Let's get a funding measure in place that will fund the government for the remainder of this fiscal year and be done with it. We've got serious work to be done. We've got a budget resolution we need to govern the spending that's going to occur for next year. We've got process reform that we badly need. There's an awful lot that needs to be addressed, and this really just needs to get done. So I hope we'll do that soon. As we discuss the level of spending that we're going to have in this CR that will continue from when the current one ends, hopefully, I hope there will be just one more that will take us through the remainder of this fiscal year. It's really important that we get that level of spending down to the level at least to the level that was passed in the House. And I want to talk about why. And, and I've looked at some of the individual cuts are tough. They're going to make things difficult in many cases. But it's very necessary that we do this for the sake of beginning to restore some sense of fiscal sanity to get us on a sustainable trajectory. One of the arguments I have heard from some of my friends on the other side of the aisle who have real concerns and objections in some cases to adopting a spending measure that does reduce spending, I would argue modestly overall. One of the arguments I've heard is that this will cost jobs, that if the government doesn't spend more than what's contemplated in the House-passed continuing resolution, we'll lose jobs, that if we cut government spending, we'll have lower employment. Mr. President, Madam President, I'm here to suggest that that is exactly backwards. That is precisely wrong, and in fact, it's the exact opposite. At the point that we are at, the more the government spends, the fewer jobs we're going to have. And the sooner and the more quickly we bring this government into some sense of fiscal stability, the more employment we're going to have, the more job creation we're going to have. I think for many people that's common sense, but it's not universally accepted here. I understand that. But consider this. If all we needed to do was have the government spend more money to create jobs, then recessions would always be a trivial matter, because we'd just crank up some government spending and everybody would be back to work and we'd be fine. But we know that doesn't work. It's never worked. If that's what worked, frankly, the economy would be booming right now. We've got spending on a scale that we've never even contemplated before. As a percentage of GDP, total spending, deficit spending, by any measure, the spending is at a record level. And yet, unemployment is persistently much, much higher than we had hoped it would be, much higher than it typically is at this stage in what should be an economic recovery. And it's not just this experience that we can look at. We can look around the world. Countries that have lived beyond their means and where the government occupies a big sphere of the economy, a big segment of the economy and spends a great deal, those are not the more successful economies. In fact, those are the least successful economies. They have persistently high unemployment rates. They have persistently low job creation, low economic growth, and a low standard of living. This is all widely recognized, I think, but not entirely so here in Washington. Now, of course, it's true that the government can always create a job. The government can have a program that instructs someone to go out and hire someone, give that person a wage, and bingo, you've created a job. Government can always do that. Of course, the problem is, in the process, government destroys jobs in the private sector. And that is because the money that is necessary to create that government job has to come from somewhere. And it always comes from the private sector, necessarily. And when the money comes from out of the private sector and goes to the government for the government to create a job, well, that does several things. First of all, the government tends to allocate resources much less efficiently than free men and women do in the voluntary exchanges of the marketplace. So you get politically motivated allocation of resources rather than market-oriented allocation. And this is widely acknowledged to lead to lower investment returns, less efficient investment, and therefore less job creation. But this isn't just theory. There's plenty of empirical data on this, and I wanted to observe for my colleagues and talk about one particular chart that I think is a very helpful illustration, because this kind of goes to the heart of my point. Now, my point is that the job creation, the job creation that we desperately need right now, is only going to come from the private sector. The sustainable jobs that lead to solid economic growth, permanent jobs, wealth creation, and real opportunity is going to come from the private sector. And that is driven by private investment. The more government spends, the more it crowds out private investment and precludes the very engine of economic growth and job creation that we need. The chart behind me is a great illustration of this. It's provided by John Taylor, a very, very well-regarded economist whose work is highly respected and widely circulated. And in this, Mr. Taylor illustrates that the unemployment rate is inversely related to private investment. So when the private sector is making investments, and this can be investments in new businesses, investment in capital, but when private money is being put to work by citizens, as the percentage of the economy, as the amount of this investment declines as a percentage of our economy, we see the unemployment rate go up. And when we see private investment growing, as it did for a sustained period from the early 90s to the early part of this decade, we see that steady upward trend. It was driving down the unemployment rate. It's very, very clear that as this line goes down, the private investment line declines, unemployment rate goes up, and when it turns around and the private investment as a percentage of our economy grows, the unemployment rate declines. Not just for this period. You can see the trend then continues. We get another period after about the year 2000 of declining private investment as a percentage of GDP and a rise in unemployment rate. And now that we have seen in recent years a long, pretty precipitous decline in private investment as a percentage of our economy, we've seen this huge increase in the unemployment rate. These lines, at a quick glance, you can see it's almost a mirror image of each other. And this, I think, is a great illustration of a simple and really well-known fact that it's private investment that drives job growth. And when the government gets too big, as ours is today, and when it spends too much money, as this one does, and when the deficit gets too big, it crowds out and precludes the private investment that drives job growth. That's why it's so important that we get spending under control. That's why it's so important that we pass a continuing resolution that will fund the government for the rest of this year at the lowest possible level that we can reach an agreement on, because lower spending is actually going to drive job growth. There's several other aspects to this fact that lower spending will lead to greater job growth. One is, everybody knows that higher government spending eventually leads to higher taxes. And we're at this point now where we have this huge shortfall in the revenue relative to the amount of money that's being spent. And so any potential investor wonders, how much are taxes going to go up? When are they going to go up? Are they going to go up on me? Will they go up on my investment? Will they go up on my labor? These are just uncertainties that we here in Washington have introduced into the economy. But everybody who's contemplating an investment has to wrestle with this question, and uncertainty is the enemy of private investment and job growth. The other possibility is that maybe before or instead of a tax increase, maybe there'll be a debt crisis. We are borrowing money on such a huge scale, it's not at all clear that we can continue. I guarantee we can't continue this indefinitely. I don't know how much longer it can continue. But that's a very dangerous thing to flirt with, ever higher levels of debt, and the expectation that lenders are going to just keep on lending us this money, especially when they're at such large percentages of our economy. And then there's yet another variable that's thrown in this mix, and that's the danger that the central bank, that the monetary authority will decide that maybe the easiest way out of this mess is to print money. This is a road that's been gone down many times before in many parts of the world. It always leads to a disaster, but monetizing the debt is a way that many governments have chosen to deal with excessive spending. I'm very worried right now about the policy of the Fed. The QE2 is a policy by which they are currently monetizing more than half of all of the deficit that we're running this year. I think that's a very, very dangerous policy. Combined, the combination of this fiscal imbalance and this fiscally imprudent policy, together with this very, very accommodative monetary policy, I think this is a very dangerous mix. What we can do in the short run, and what we ought to be doing right now, is addressing the spending problem that's at the heart of all of this, that's really driving this. And in my view, that starts with the continuing resolution that will fund the government for the remainder of this year. We've just passed one that will fund this government for the next 3 weeks. I wish this had been for the remainder of this year. But we've got no time to waste now. We've got to get this resolved, and we've got to move on to a budget that brings us our spending and our revenue into balance without raising taxes and ruining economic growth. But this should be the big priority for this body, and I hope that when we get back from this recess, this is what we'll be working on. The spending measure to close out this fiscal year, a budget that will put us back on a sustainable path, and pro-growth policies that will lead to the job creation that we need. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from New Mexico is recognized.
Madam President, I ask permission to speak for up to 15 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I wanted to just take these few minutes to discuss high oil and gas prices, gasoline prices. I think when we get home to our respective states this next week, we're going to find that many of the people we represent are understandably concerned about the rising price of gasoline at the pump. And they have good reason to be concerned. Senator Murkowski and I hosted a Senate-wide briefing on Tuesday afternoon with 3 top oil industry analysts. We had Dr. Richard Newell, who's the head of the Energy Information Administration. We had Mr. Bob McNally, who was part of the Bush administration's White House team on energy markets, and Mr. Frank Verastro, who is the head of the Energy and National Security Program with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And they gave us their insights and explanations as to what is causing the rise in the price of gasoline at the pump. Let me go through 4 charts here to try to summarize what they told us at that briefing. I think it's very useful information for my colleagues and for anyone else who's interested in the subject. This first chart is labeled "Gasoline Prices Reflect the Cost of Crude Oil." A fundamental truth which they all subscribe to is that the primary driver of the price of gasoline at the pump is in fact the price of crude oil on world markets. This chart demonstrates that. It shows the price trends since 2005 for gasoline. That's in the yellow line on this chart, and it shows the price of crude oil, and that's the green line. While some past gasoline price spikes can be attributed to phasing out of the additive MTBE, for the last 3 years, gasoline price movements have exactly tracked global crude oil prices. So the idea that our gasoline prices are high today because of some particular action that the administration, the Obama administration, has taken is just not supported by the facts. The reasons for the current crude oil price increase are equally straightforward. In listening to each of the analysts highlight the factors that he thought was important in explaining why crude oil prices are at the levels that we haven't seen since 2008, I was struck by 2 explanations that have been advanced in many of the political speeches here in Washington and around the country about oil and gas prices. Frankly, the conclusions or the allegations or arguments made in those political speeches did not comport with what these analysts were telling us. First, none of the experts that talked to us highlighted the administration's permitting process in the Gulf of Mexico as being a significant factor in determining world oil markets. I asked Dr. Newell whether the current pace of permitting had any implication for the Energy Information Administration's short-term price forecast, and his answer was refreshingly direct. He said no. And I would point out that neither of his co-panelists disagreed with that conclusion. Second, any anticipated Environmental Protection Agency regulation of greenhouse gas emissions at refineries was not included in any of the presentations as a driver behind the current increase in prices. In fact, more broadly, neither the EPA nor any kind of U.S. regulatory action were discussed as important to understanding world oil prices. I know some of my colleagues remain concerned that we have not built a new refinery in the United States since the 1970s. I'd like to assure them that the data suggests that their concerns are not well-founded at this particular point. Demand for refined products is believed to have peaked in the United States. At the moment, 17% of our existing refining capacity in this country stands idle. And that's not because of environmental regulations. It's because demand for refined products has come down. In my opinion, it does not make a lot of sense to be debating whether we need new refineries when we're not using the capacity that we already have in existing refineries. So Having explored those factors that are not influencing oil price movements, let me spend a few minutes discussing factors that are contributing to increased oil and gasoline prices. The bulk of the discussion at this briefing we had on Tuesday about high oil prices was about what's going on in the Middle East and North Africa. And this chart depicts what has happened to the price of oil, U.S. oil prices January through March of 2011. So from the beginning of this year until the current time. I think it's obvious that this is that the major force driving oil prices is the instability that we've seen in the Middle East and North Africa. When the world's key oil producing and exporting region, which is the Middle East and North Africa, when that region is unstable, world oil markets are also unstable. When political unrest threatens major choke points in the world oil transit routes, world oil markets react, as they have. And when a member of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, stops exporting oil, which has virtually occurred in the case of Libya, world oil markets react. Also, when there are fears that a nearby neighbor and a close ally of Saudi Arabia, home of the world's largest oil production capacity, begins to have political upheavals, that raises tensions in world oil markets as well. So, as you can see from this chart, oil prices are very sensitive to these kinds of developments. Oil prices went up as regime change was realized in Egypt amid concerns about access to the Suez Canal. Prices quickly came down again as it looked increasingly unlikely that traffic through the canal would be disrupted. Then Libya became the first major oil exporting country to be affected by the wave of popular uprisings spreading throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and oil prices reacted immediately, indicating market concerns that the situation might get worse before it got better. Indeed, it has worsened. We now have virtually all Libyan oil exports terminated or stopped or suspended. Sanctions against Gaddafi's government, combined with chaos on the ground in Libya, have driven Libyan oil exports to near zero. There's been little hope for improvement so far in the near future. So we're just beginning to face a potential further escalation of tensions in the region. On Monday, of course, Saudi Arabia sent troops across the causeway onto the island, neighbor of Bahrain, and this adds to world tension. World oil markets have reacted with expectations, and here I'm avoiding the use of the more politically loaded term speculation, although I do believe that that word is appropriate. It is speculation or expectations that the situation is at risk of getting worse before it gets better. So into this uncertain environment, we now have a new source of even greater uncertainty. That is the earthquake that has plagued the island nation of Japan, the ensuing tsunami, the nuclear disaster that has struck Japan. All of that has introduced the possibility that the world's third largest economy might be consuming less oil in the near future than was earlier assumed. And world oil markets have again reacted, this time by falling to under $100 per barrel as we try to better understand the size and the scope of the disaster that our Japanese friends and allies are facing. So what can Congress do to help ease the burden of high prices for U.S. consumers when oil prices are determined mostly outside our borders, as I think they clearly have been? I think a realistic, responsible answer has to be focused on becoming less vulnerable to oil price changes over the medium and the long term. And by doing so, we become less vulnerable by using less oil. I believe that increased U.S. oil production can play a significant role in world oil markets. The United States has fairly modest resources compared to much of the world. Our base of proven reserves is small. Many people have observed that the United States has less than 2% of the world's proven reserves. Despite what economists and analysts agree is a relatively modest resource base, the oil and gas industry in our country has led the world in developing state-of-the-art technology for oil exploration and production. Our companies are continuing to get more oil out of the ground and into world oil markets than any of us could have believed was possible. To use a boxing metaphor, we're punching above our weight in oil and gas production thanks to the technology lead that our companies have developed. According to the Energy Information Administration, oil production in North Dakota has risen by 150% since 2005. That's all from the Bakken Shale Formation. This is due to the advent and application of new drilling technology. It is a success story that we all can celebrate. Let me now talk about this third chart. Oil production is up strongly across the United States in the last few years. This chart demonstrates that current increases in oil production are a significant change from what we've seen in the last several decades. We have not had to repeal any environmental laws to achieve this or change the protections that apply on public lands. Let's not forget that even with U.S. production strongly increasing, oil prices have also been increasing. While domestic oil production plays an important role in ensuring the energy security of the country, its contribution to the world oil balance is just not sufficient to bring global oil prices down. It's therefore not a complete answer to the high oil and gas prices that tax our consumers and that threaten our country's economic health. So this leads me to conclude that the key to reducing our vulnerability to world oil prices and volatility is for us to find ways to use less oil. We need to diversify our sources of transportation fuel. We need to set ourselves on the right path, as we did when we passed the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. That law required us to make our vehicles more efficient and to shift toward relying more on renewable fuel. This chart, this final chart, shows how the Energy Information Administration's long-term forecast for U.S. dependence on imported oil, how it was predicted to go, what they predicted our level of dependence would be prior to the passage of that 2007 bill, and what they now predicted is after the passage and implementation of that bill. There are two main features of this graph I think are particularly noteworthy. First, prior to the enactment of this bill in 2007, the Energy Information Administration had been predicting that U.S. reliance on imported oil would continue to increase, in large part because of the biofuels and the fuel efficiency policies that we included in that act. The latest forecast shows that our reliance on imported oil probably peaked, in fact, in 2005. And is now going down and is expected to continue going down for the rest of this forecast period, which is out to year 2035. Second, the amount of oil that we now will not need to import from today to 2035, that is the oil that we will be able to save because of the Energy Independence and Security Act we passed in 2007, amounts to about 26 billion barrels. That compared to the previous forecast. What I'm saying there is that the difference between the blue line, which was the earlier projection, and the red line, when you take that out to 2035, the total oil involved there is 26 billion barrels of oil. This amount is greater than the total U.S. proven oil reserves, which are estimated at 23 billion barrels. So I hope we can all agree that this has been a significant success. How do we continue on this path toward reduced oil and gas reducing our oil dependence. I'll conclude by highlighting three areas, three key goals that I hope we can focus on in the Senate in the coming weeks. First, we need to enable further expansion of our renewable fuel industry, which is currently facing infrastructure and financing constraints. Second, we need to move forward the timeline for market penetration by electric vehicles. And finally, we need to make sure that we use natural gas vehicles in as many applications as makes sense based on that technology. Every barrel of oil that we displace from the transportation sector and that we therefore do not need to consume in the United States makes our economy stronger, not to mention our personal pocketbooks, less vulnerable to the volatility of the current marketplace. So we need to keep drilling. We're good at that, and it is helpful to have more supplies on the world market, and I'm not arguing against that. But at the same time, we need to recognize that the long-term solution to this challenge is to move away from such great dependence on oil. This is a strategic vision that President George W. Bush, who previously had worked in the oil industry, clearly articulated in his 2006 State of the Union address. We subsequently proved in Congress in 2007, the year after that State of the Union address, that we have the ability to make significant changes in our energy consumption and that it is possible to mobilize a bipartisan consensus to do so. The bipartisan path that we laid out in the Energy Independence and Security Act in 2007 is the right approach. As part of whatever bipartisan approach we take to energy in the weeks and months ahead, we need to continue moving in this same direction. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. from Utah.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise to speak on a matter of great importance to the economic health of state and local governments. I'm talking about dangerously underfunded employee pensions. We hear about this problem every day in states like Illinois, California, New Jersey, and many others. It is a multi-trillion-dollar problem. Let me repeat that. The underfunding of these pensions runs into the trillions of dollars, not billions, trillions. Now, how did this happen? There are two primary causes. First, governments have promised too much money in lifetime pensions. And second, governments have not set aside enough money to pay for those pensions. The shortfall between the money that has been promised and the money set aside is called underfunding. But that's just a sterile to pay the bills. And where I come from, that's called being broke. It is bad enough when you go broke because you have been irresponsible with your own money, yet it is a tragedy when governments go broke being irresponsible with taxpayer money. That is what I fear we are watching as this public pension crisis unfolds. There have been many studies in recent years of our public pension crisis. There's no question about whether this crisis exists. The only question is the magnitude of the crisis. One prominent study by scholars at the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University estimates that public pension plans are underfunded by over $3 trillion. That's a lot of money. An analyst at the Brookings Institute said public pensions are $2.5 trillion in the red. A study published last month found that all by itself, California has a $240 billion pension shortfall. You heard that right. California alone has a pension debt of $250 billion. Some have estimated that Illinois is in even worse financial shape. If the states and localities do not act aggressively to address these shortfalls, then the question will not be whether the states will become insolvent, but when. Regardless of whose numbers and which study gets the closest to the mark, there is no denying that public employee pensions face a multi-trillion-dollar shortfall in the aggregate. Though none will deny this shortfall, some will seek to shift the blame and shirk responsibility for this crisis. Now, I want to nip in the bud one of the arguments of those interests that would prefer to ignore this crisis. They will argue that this is not a problem of too many pension promises and the underfunding of those promises. They will try to divert attention from the fact that public employee pensions have too often not been funded on a sound basis. Instead, they will say that the pension funding problem is owing to the 2008 economic crisis and the big businesses that they say caused it. This is way off the mark. But don't trust me, trust the numbers. This pension shortfall existed before the recession, and an attempt to lay blame at the feet of Wall Street or big business or some other group is just plain blame shifting. One aspect of the problem is that governments have been slow and public employees have been resistant to transitioning to the types of retirement plans that private sector workers have been living with for years. The rest of the world has moved toward 401k-style plans called defined contribution plans. In these plans, costs are lower and more predictable, and they fit well with an increasingly mobile and dynamic workforce. Yet governments have remained wedded to expensive traditional pension plans for far too long. These old-style traditional pension plans, defined benefit plans, owe a monthly payment for life to each employee regardless of how much money the government has set aside, regardless of how well the pension assets have been invested, and regardless of whether the ratio of active workers to retirees has remained stable. For most private companies, these plans proved simply unsustainable. And over time, they moved towards more flexible retirement plans for employees. Yet, as usual, government is slow. It is slow to innovate and slow to adapt. So even though these defined benefit plans had the potential to cause enormous financial problems for governments, governments stuck with them. Private companies learned long ago that traditional pension plans are too expensive for most businesses. In 1985, 80% of medium and large private companies had a traditional pension plan. Today, just 30% have a traditional plan. By contrast, 84% of state and local government workers are covered by high-cost traditional pension plans. And government is not just any employer. Governments only exist because of taxpayers. Ultimately, taxpayers are the employers of government employees. Yet these governments are living in the past, playing irresponsibly with taxpayer money, and leaving taxpayers to foot the bill for too many lifetime pension promises. So why do these lifetime pension guarantees continue? There are many reasons, but at the top of the list is the unique character of government as an employer. Private employers moved away from traditional pensions to more affordable 401k style plans because they can't stay in business if they ignore economic reality. Yet governments have kept their unaffordable traditional plans, often because public employee unions use taxpayer-funded union dues to elect state and local politicians and then ask the same politicians they just elected for costly pension deals at taxpayer expense. When a union bargains with a private employer, employer and employees have an interest in the business continuing as a viable enterprise. If the benefits are costly and uncontrollable, the business goes under and everyone is out of a job. But where the interests are in a negotiation between a public employee union and the person they just helped to elect to office, where are those interests? Union bosses are sitting across the table from the governor of the state, the governor that they just helped to elect with millions in campaign contributions, and they ask him for a costly, guaranteed lifetime retirement package, often with little or no cost sharing by the public employee. What is the politician going to say? Sorry, but I can't help you? I doubt it. I want to read you something from the Wall Street Journal. On October 22, 2010, just prior to the last elections, the Journal carried a story about the role that the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, or AFSCME, was playing in that election. According to the Journal, quote, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees is now the biggest outside spender of the 2010 elections. The 1.6 million member AFSCME is spending a total of $87.5 million on the elections after tapping into a $16 million emergency account to help fortify the Democrats' hold on Congress. Last week, AFSCME dug deeper, taking out a $2 million loan to fund its push. The group is spending money on television advertisements, phone calls, campaign mailings, and other political efforts. We're the big dogs, said Larry Scanlon, the head of AFSCME's political operations, but we don't like to brag, unquote. We're the big dog? That about sums it up. And when the big dog barks, it expects the people that it helped elect to jump. Now, why do you think they are spending all of this money? Because public employment unions care about global warming. Richard Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, a man who I respect, has said that he talks with the White House every day and visits a couple times a week. Why do people think he's doing that? Playing pickup basketball with the president? He's talking about how to benefit his unions. And lately, that means public employee unions. There were some recent reports suggesting that Organizing for America, a Democrat National Committee project designed to re-elect President Obama, was helping to foment the protests in Wisconsin. These unions are spending big-time money to elect politicians because they know that the politicians will deliver big-time benefits. But the chickens are coming home to roost. As we are seeing in state after state, the markets have something to say about these collusive relationships and the benefits they secure. The credit rating agencies have announced that they will begin factoring unfunded pension obligations into the calculations they use to rate the credit worthiness of states. This is significant because the total value of state bond debt is estimated to be around $1 billion, while pension debt is at least 2 or 3 times that amount. State credit ratings reveal another aspect of the state budget crisis. The 5 states that prohibit collective bargaining over retirement benefits have Moody's highest credit rating. California and Illinois, which allow collective bargaining over retirement benefits for public employees, have the lowest credit rating among the 50 states. The next 4 lowest states also allow collective bargaining. Illinois is in the worst shape of all, with less than 40% of the funds needed to pay its public employee unions, or pensions, I think I should say. The Illinois situation is so dire that for the last 2 years the state has had to borrow money just to make its pension contributions. And this year, Illinois had to pay a 2% higher interest rate just to borrow money to contribute to its pension program. Now, this is madness, and it cannot go on forever. 30 years ago, the federal government moved away from an expensive, traditional pension plan and set up a basic pension plan in combination with a 401k-style defined contribution plan. The system has worked well so far, although at some point we might need to reform federal pensions too. Some forward-looking states have begun moving to 401k-style plans. In my own home state of Utah, the traditional pension plan is being replaced. New employees are being given a choice between a 401k-style plan and a hybrid plan with a combination of traditional and 401k-style features. Last year, Governor Chris Christie in New Jersey added a 401k plan for a portion of the New Jersey workforce. In Kansas, Governor Sam Brownback and the Kansas legislature are studying the possibility of converting their pension system into a 401k-style plan. And in Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker has asked that the state study the feasibility of establishing a 401k style plan. There are many potential solutions to the public pension crisis, and all of them should receive consideration. We should be encouraging these courageous governors on rather than demonizing them and demagoguing in this issue. I, for one, would like to congratulate the governor of Wisconsin for his bold stand on the issue of public employee benefits. The victory he secured last week is really significant. He stood responsibly for long-term interests of his state rather than doing the easy thing and caving under the pressure of union-organized protests and the childish and disrespectful resistance of Democratic lawmakers who chose to flee the state rather than engage in this debate. Governor Walker understands that our greatest enemy is delay. The director of the Pew Center on the states has said that while these problems are significant, they can be solved if we act now. But if we wait, the crisis will become unmanageable. Mr. President, it is my intention as ranking member of the Finance Committee to find a way to address the public pension crises if state and local governments don't step up to the plate. I am under no illusions that this will be an easy task. The problem is both large and complex. There are many potential solutions that must be studied, and some will not be pleasant. Some of my colleagues here in the Senate have a proposal to address the problem, and I will be working with them as well. I do not have all of the answers yet, and I have not yet settled on what I believe are really the best solutions. But we are working hard and talking to the experts about the best way to proceed. I'm sure of one thing, however, and I want to be 100% clear about this. There will be no federal bailout of any state or local government. Now, let me just repeat that. No federal bailout. Just last month, after Illinois sold its high-interest bonds, the governor indicated that he plans to ask for a federal guarantee. Well, Governor, you can save your breath. The answer is no. We cannot ask taxpayers in the rest of the country to pay for underfunded pensions in Illinois, California, or any other state that made promises that it clearly cannot keep. To do so would be more than unfair. It would be immoral. A federal bailout cannot happen, and it will not happen. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.